you heard about what Japan's doing with their national debt? So they've started
Putting it on the rug. Just put it on the rug.
They're getting their national bank.
Really, what Kim Jong just said?
They're getting their national bank to buy back the country's debt directly. So essentially, just to do it as a kind of as a cost neutral transaction. So they issue a whole bunch of money, it buys back the debt, and the two just cancel each other out. And they've been doing that. I think they said they've bought back 40% of their national debt in the short, recently. And everyone told them that if they did that, it'd be terrible. And it'll cause crazy economic effects and inflation and everything else. And so far it hasn't at all. So it's very, very interesting what they're doing. They might be following basically a template on how to save their economy and society that doesn't involve putting all the money in the hands of the people that own the private banks. It'd be very interesting to see what happens.
That's intriguing.
Yeah.
When you look into the finer details of how the financial market works, that's when you really start realising that this weird concept of if the next GFC is as big as people saying, it'll crash the entire system. Because you look at the way debt is handled at a national level, it is. When you look at America, for example, if they all of a sudden have to pay back their debt, they can't. Just the system crashes. There's just everyone's too far in debt to pay anyone back. So that's you say to people the whole system's going to crash. But how? It's it's hard to explain. But when everyone owes more than they can make, no one can pay it back anymore.
Yeah.
And you either end up with the Egypt situation, which is where taxes and all that first came from. It's the massive famine happened. And everyone sold everything. Eventually it was money. First it was money, then it was livestock, then it was land. They sold everything to the pharaoh so that he'd keep feeding them from all the grain that he'd stored up. And then when the famine ended, they all went back and worked on their land that he owned, and all of a sudden they had to pay tax to him because it was his land, and that's how the system was created. So either do we all eventually end up living on land and working for this one organisation, or does the system crash? I think it's too big a thing for one organisation to run everything. Although the Bible does say one world currency in the end times.
Yeah, I don't think that... it's interesting because essentially having to pay tax because someone else owns the land, that's more of a tithe.
No, it's not necessarily. So that's where this whole... It's the first time kind of...
I get it, yeah, back in history, but...
So everything belongs to, I suppose it was the first communism.
No, it is, because you're not paying the tax because you're getting a service, you're paying the tax because...
You're just getting a wage, basically.
Yeah, because you're not actually owning the property. So that's kind of the whole no tax without representation, because you shouldn't be having to pay a tax if you're not getting something back for that tax.
Yeah.
It should never just be a tax. It should be, we're going to do something for you, even if that's just keep the lights on and keep the police force going. But that's why you pay the tax. It shouldn't just be like, oh, you're here, so we get to tax you. That's extortion.
Yeah, so it's for them it was, everything was, they were just employees to the government. But then as that system was put in place in other areas where people owned their own place, that's where it started to move tax-wise into government.
Yeah. No, I get that.
That's why there's these bunch of dimwits that will try and disprove the Bible by showing there's no evidence of a huge group of people ever being slaves in Egypt. No record of the Hebrews who were being slaves there. Well, once again, you're translating it wrong. Everyone lived on the Pharaoh's land. They weren't slaves, just everyone worked for him. They're all, if you look at the translation, the original wording, definition, they're all slaves.
Yeah, but
servants. They all work for him.
It's serfs, isn't it? I mean, serfs are... they're essentially slaves. I mean, the only difference between a serf and a slave is serfs get to organise their house the way they want it.
Well, they can quit and they can leave.
Serfs can't.
They could do.
I mean, serfs can't. Not really. I mean, serfs... I guess they could physically try and run away, but then so could slaves, I guess.
And serfs, they can just say, well, I'm not coming back, because different slaves they're owned.
Well, I mean, yeah, slave. You're right. Slaves are explicitly owned, but I mean, serfs probably couldn't go away. I mean, you wouldn't have any. You wouldn't.
You wouldn't, but you could.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like very, very technically.
Because you own nothing to take any wealth with you.
Yeah, I mean, very, very technically, you could make that. That's why there's two different words, but it's a very, very minor distinction. I mean, it's like you would basically have to, take like whatever little food you had with you, and then by foot.
The servant still gets a wage.
Huh?
You still get a wage.
Who does?
Servant.
A servant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But slave you don't.
But with a serf, you don't.
Oh, what's a serf? I thought you were just.
So serf is exactly that. That you own. You don't own the land. You're allowed to use the land, but anything you do on that land
belongs to the landlord.
Belongs to the landlord.
Oh, right, yeah.
Does the serf have rights in terms of their own body?
So
like you can
you
can rape and whip a slave. Can you rape and whip a serf?
Essentially, yeah.
If you're in the Middle East, you can.
Yeah.
So a slave's got less rights.
You can do that to free people in the Middle East as well.
A slave will have slightly less individual rights than a serf, but it's like I said, it's not much of a distinction. It's more. It tends to be more down to the fact that you will have
the right to not be raped. Whipped is kind of a bit. I wouldn't say it's a minor.
Well, no, I mean, as a serf, you could. If you're the law, you pretty much could. Yeah. I mean, there'd be no one. It's explicit versus implicit. So, like, the slave, you'd be able to, explicitly, you'd be allowed to whip and rape them, whatever. With the serf, you could do that. The only thing that could go against you is a different lord that decides to take umbrage over that, invade your land, and enforce some kind of external law over your land for your whipping.
Are we talking about current times, or are we talking about?
We're talking about the concept, regardless of time. There really isn't a lot of difference between a serf and a slave. There really isn't. I mean, there is some, but not really, and especially not in practice. The only difference in practice is that you would have a lot more serfs per person than you would have slaves. So that if you had, if you were one lord that has 10 slaves, then you're much more likely to whip any individual one of them. Whereas if you're one lord that looks after 10,000 serfs, the chances that you would individually whip any one of them is very low. But your ability to do that to either group is basically the same. It's just slightly different arrangements.
Did you hear about the 9 travellers that got done for modern day slavery?
No.
Well, they would be serfs. They wouldn't actually be slaves, if you think about it, because they're not actually owned. So to your exact definition, you're not allowed to whip them. They just could whip them, right? Yeah. And no one didn't. So they would really be serfs, not slaves, in that sense, is my point. But essentially, that's my point. It is the same thing, really.
Yeah. I mean, the media called it like modern day slavery, but I don't think I think the law would be like
by definition slavery,
deprivation of liberty.
Yeah, I mean by definition they couldn't be slaves because slavery is abolished. So so they couldn't be slaves. They could be prisoners. They could be blah blah blah. They could be acting as serfs.
The Turks don't have slaves. They just get workers to come.
They just have Indonesians.
And they take their passports and they're not allowed to go out until they're allowed.
Yeah, that was my point about serfs. You just practically you can't leave. So you could argue like, is it this, is it that? But in essence, you get to either starve and die or carry on working.
So these gypsies fucking kept homeless people. One was for up to 23 years and they just basically got them working for them. So they pulled them off the street or from homeless shelters, gave them a job, and then they made them live them with the traveller community, and they just used them to do like jobs for them, and then they took the money off them and just basically locked them in a caravan or something, whatever they did. And they said they're having to these people can't live without support because they've lived for over 23 years as a traveller's slave.